Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is a controller. It has buttons on the front. All of them were God intended. This is how controllers worked for decades, and honestly, nobody questioned it. You pressed a button, something happened, and if it didn't, that was on you. Now, this is also a controller, but this one doesn't trust you. This one decided the front of the controller wasn't enough. It took buttons and turned them around and hid them behind your hands like a secret you're not supposed to tell casual players about. These aren't buttons anymore. They're allegations. At some point, controllers stopped being toys and started becoming evidence. Evidence that you lost because of the hardware, not because you missed every shot. This is the story of how controllers became professional. See, a pro controller isn't officially defined, but we all know one when we see it. It's heavier, it's more expensive, it has software. It usually comes with at least one YouTube review and it says, "Is it worth it?" in the thumbnail. A pro controller exists to answer one very specific emotional need: the need to believe you are being held back by plastic. And the funny part is that none of this started on purpose. See, back in the Wii era, Nintendo was busy asking what would happen if controllers stopped being normal. The Wii remote showed up, looking like a TV remote that got lost on its way to the couch. And then you added the nunchuck, and it existed purely to make sure your hands were never relaxed again. Competitive players were not the priority, movement was. Waggle was. Balance boards were. And somehow, despite all of that, Nintendo accidentally created something professional. The Wii Classic controller showed up quietly. Like, it didn't want to even be noticed. It had two analog sticks, face buttons, shoulder buttons, everything you expected it to be. Never called it a pro controller at the beginning because Nintendo, well, they just didn't do that. They don't say pro at that time. They imply it and let you figure it out later. But Smash players immediately did. And then Nintendo released the Classic Controller Pro, which added handles and solved the one problem the original had, which was it felt like you were holding a DVD case. This was about as close as Nintendo got to saying, okay, fine, here's something for people who care. There were no back buttons, no profiles, no ambition, but it was a solid controller that worked, and then called itself pro and politely exited the conversation. Meanwhile, Microsoft accidentally created the most important controller shape in history during the Xbox 360 generation. That controller didn't try to be innovative. It improved on its previous design. It showed up comfortable. The sticks were in the right place. The triggers felt good. The buttons were fine. It wasn't exciting. It was correct. And because of that, it became the standard everyone else quietly copied. And then Scuff happened. Scuff looked at the Xbox 360 controller and said, "What if this, but anxious?" They added paddles to the back, buttons you could press without moving your thumbs, buttons that said, "I would like to jump in and aim at the same time because I hate myself." Trigger stops showed up, custom shells, different stick heights. Suddenly, controllers weren't just controllers anymore. They were loadouts. These things weren't official. They weren't cheap. They were barely acknowledged. But competitive players loved them because once you get used to the back buttons, going without them feels like trying to go run with your shoelaces tied together. Sony, during the PlayStation 3 era, watched all of this from a distance and decided it wanted absolutely no part in it. The DualShock 3 stayed the DualShock 3. No paddles, no premium versions, nothing. If you wanted a Pro controller on PlayStation, you bought a Scuff and pretended it was Sony's idea. Then the Wii U happened, the system nobody bought. And Nintendo made one of the best controllers ever created, and nobody noticed. The Wii U Pro controller was light, comfortable, it had a battery life that bordered on fictional. Over 40 hours of gameplay. You could charge it, forget about it for a week, and it would still be alive. And that's not an exaggeration. It, however, did not have back buttons. It didn't need them, it just worked. Unfortunately, it was attached to the Wii U, so history moved on without it. Everything changed in 2015 when Microsoft made it official. They don't want to go pro. The Xbox Elite wireless controller made its way, and it wasn't subtle. It showed up expensive and proud of it. Metal thumbsticks, rear paddles, trigger stops, custom profiles. This wasn't a modded controller anymore. This was a Microsoft product looking you in the eye and saying, yes, we know you're going to pay for this. And people did. This was the moment Pro controllers stopped being a weird niche and started being a category. It was no longer embarrassing to own one or even trying to hide it. It was aspirational. You weren't sweaty, you were serious. And then the Elite Series 2 arrived and improved almost everything, while also introducing the exciting new feature of Sometimes Broken. Adjustable stick tension, internal battery, and even more customization, and despite the complaints, it became the benchmark. This is the controller every other premium controller gets compared to, whether it wants to be or not. Sony, watching Microsoft sell confidence for $180, finally reacted during the PlayStation 4 era. Not with the full controller, but with an attachment. The DualShock 4 back button attachment clipped onto the bottom of the controller and added 2 rear buttons. It was cheap, it worked, and it sold out instantly. And it proved something very important. People wanted back buttons. A lot. By the end of the PS4 generation, SCUF had completely taken over competitive PlayStation gaming. If you were playing shooters seriously and didn't have paddles, you either didn't care or didn't want to admit how much they helped. And then there was the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo made the Switch Pro controller, and it was excellent. Comfortable, great battery life, HD rumble, NFC, solid build. And it stopped one step short of greatness. No back buttons, no profiles, no advanced features. Nintendo made a perfect traditional controller in an era where tradition had already moved on. Instead of changing their own controller, Nintendo did something very Nintendo. They did let everyone else do it. They licensed official second-party and third-party controllers, started showing up with rear buttons. Power A makes officially licensed Switch controllers wireless with 2 back buttons. The Fusion Pro went full Elite with 4 paddles, and Hori put rear buttons on the Split Pad Pro for handheld players. Nintendo allowed all of it, as long as it wasn't them. Those controllers had no HD rumble, no system level mapping, and the innovation was permitted but outsourced. For years, Nintendo's message was clear. Back buttons exist. Players can have them, but Nintendo will not be responsible for them. And then they blinked. The Nintendo Switch 2 Pro controller includes back grip buttons, real ones, first-party ones, Nintendo-made ones. They're called the GR and GL buttons, which sounds less like controller buttons and more like a noise you make when you're swallowing wrong. But there they are. Integrated, official, no licensing loopholes, no pretending it's casual. After 15 years of watching the industry move forward, Nintendo finally stepped up and joined them in the same room. They didn't market it as Elite. They didn't make a big deal out of it. They just added the buttons and acted like this was always the plan, which somehow makes it even more Nintendo. And the funniest part is that nothing broke. Games didn't become confusing. Casual players didn't revolt. The world didn't end. Turns out, back buttons weren't the problem. Waiting was. Controllers didn't suddenly become worse when they got more complicated. They just gave players options, and eventually, even Nintendo agreed. So if you're wondering when controllers got so serious, the answer actually is slowly, over decades, quietly, and then all of a sudden, all at once. And if you're wondering whether you need a pro controller, the answer is no, absolutely not. But will you want one after losing a single match? Yeah, probably. So I always want to thank you guys for joining me here at Starflag Media Gaming, and I will see you guys in the next video. Hit that like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment.